The Israel Victory Project was started in 2016 by the Middle East Forum, an organization founded by Daniel Pipes, a professor and Middle East historian starting back in 1994, based on the idea that for the past 20 years, or even 26 years if we want to talk about the beginning of the Oslo peace process, Israel has given up on its ability to bring certain defeat in the definition of the way in which Palestinians see themselves vis-a-vis Israel, rather than as equals. Those that first have to understand that their national ideology cannot be based on hating another nationality. It can only be based on accepting them for who they are rather than who they want us to be. You have all kinds of people involved in the project, whether it be bereaved families, terror victims, reservists, those individuals who are in high school who are about to go in the army, former generals, members of Knesset. All strata of Israeli society have been involved in this debate and in this conversation, because it's not about what Israelis have to do to bring about the other side to recognize who they are. It's what the government who leads those Israelis has to do to be able to implement the measures within moral, humanitarian, and internationally legally sound ways to convince not just the Hamas and not just Fatah, but the Palestinian people that it is not worth their while anymore to keep on fighting against Israel.
How do you define your agenda in terms of, the spectrum nowadays? Is it right, nationalist, conservative?
I think it's everything. I think it's secular. I think it's religious. I think it's left. I think it's right. I think it's dual nationality. I think it's single nationality. We're not trying to go for a solution to the conflict here. We're talking about a way in which to condition the Palestinians to move from right now their victimhood, which is based on them actually thinking they win after every time they lose, to one in which they're accepting the idea that Israel exists as a Jewish state, and only then can we start talking about the day after. We started 3 months ago with these massive billboards on the Ayalon Highway of Ismail Haniyeh, the head of Hamas, in a Speedo. And now the purpose wasn't to say, hey, look, we want you for the next Sports Illustrated swimsuit calendar. What we'd like you to be able to do is to have this vision of Haniyeh celebrating on the shores of Gaza with millions of dollars of Qatari cash in a suitcase behind him as explosive balloons float from the shores of Gaza to these fields of Israel and start burning them as they're doing right now, to say, isn't this a ridiculous situation? We have this picture of an individual who was responsible for the deaths of hundreds if not thousands of Israelis, and he's celebrating on the streets of the most main trafficked highway in the middle of Tel Aviv. Just like it's ridiculous that there's the expectation that continued gifts, continued ceasefires, continued measures to try to ease the situation of Hamas in Gaza will in some way convince them to adopt a long-term ceasefire or long-term arrangement with Israel. It won't work. It'll just invite more conflict. It's fighting a sense of complacency, which means that as long as Israel is able to maintain the status quo, everything will be fine in the long run. But the longer and longer that the state waits, the government waits, and not just this government, governments for the past 26 years, left, right, center, regardless of the political affiliation, until they have the gumption to get up one day and say, we must decide what kind of future we want to have for our children. And then after we decide that future, we will act on it to convince the Palestinians that it's no longer worth their while to fight against us, so our children don't have to go into the army, so our children don't have to fight that next war in Gaza like the next 3 or 4 operations that have took place over the last 10 years happened, from Summer Rains in 2006 until Operation Protective Edge in 2014, and just this last round of what was going on. Only then will there be a conversation on how we look at our future for the next 100, 200, 500 years, rather than when will the next rocket fall, when will the next tunnel explode, when will the next suicide bomb go off.